Good morning, this is the Eager Beaver Show.
You are listening to a True North Eager Beaver Media Podcast. The True North Eager Beaver podcasts are proudly brought to you by our founding sponsors, the Miss V Mysteries from Corvid Moon Publishing, your source for science fiction, fantasy, and cozy mysteries featuring a broad diversity of characters. CanadianTarot.com, your uniquely Canadian online eclectic tarot community and forum, and The Peppermaster, hot pepper sauces made from fresh farm ingredients to thrill your taste buds and expand your mind.
Well, good morning and hello, kids, and welcome to Season 3 and episode number 35 of the True North Eager Beaver Interview Project. Today, recording day is Thursday, November 16th, for broadcast on Friday, November 24th. So, yes, we are not live today.
Oh, no, December 1st. December 1st. The 24th. You know what?
The 24th.
Yes.
I got it right.
No, I'm out of town on the 1st.
Oh, it's on the 1st.
Yeah, we'll air this.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm confused. I'm very confused.
December 1st, which will be World AIDS Day, by the way. And we have an absolute wonderful guest for you today. Our guest is a screenwriter, an actor, a director, a playwright, extremely accomplished. He's been in movies for historical movies for CBC, like, for example, the first South Asian romantic comedy, first aired in 1983, called Best of Both Worlds. He wrote.
I remember watching that, actually.
You did? Oh.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I remember it well. It was a cultural touchstone at the time, because that was the first time anything had, when you had sort of a cross-cultural romance shown on Canadian television.
Mm-hmm. He also wrote for several TV series, including one that's dear to my heart, Fraggle Rock, if you remember that, as well as Blue Murder, Blobheads. He co-wrote the IMAX film Lost Worlds, Life in the Balance, which is a documentary. A whole bunch of awards, 4 Writer Guild of Canada Award nominations for screenwriting, including animated scripts for the National Film Board's Tail Spinners, and we're big fans of the NFB here at the Beaver Lodge. A York Trillium Award for Most Promising Writer, 2 Gemini nominations, stage plays. He's written over 100 credits in films and TV programs. You will probably recognize him for his roles as Mr. Mehta on Kim's Convenience, as Dr. Singh on Transplant, and as a Secretary General, guest role, Secretary General David Pastor on Season 5 of The Expanse on Amazon Prime. Kits, there is so much more I could say, but we'll get into it during the show. But please put your paws up and give a big round of applause for Sugith Varughese. Welcome to the Beaver Lodge, sir.
Thank you. Well, you guys, I've done a lot of podcasts, but you win the prize for having the most iconically Canadian named podcast I've ever been on.
Well, that's all Mr. Beaver.
That's me. I'm pretty eager, so it kind of says, what rhymes with eager? Beaver. Yeah, okay, let's go with that. Welcome to the Beaver Lodge. Thank you for agreeing to join us. Kits and Cubs, the reason that we wanted to bring our guest today is because at the time we were discussing it, there was a big writer strike in the United States and a big actor strike which followed. So there was the Writer Guild of America and then SAG-AFTRA. And because this man is involved both in writing and in acting, we wanted to get his opinions on what was going on. Now, the writer's strike has been resolved, and the actor's strike, I am very happy to announce, not too long ago, announced that they had signed a tentative deal. And I believe right now, as we are speaking, the actors are basically voting on whether or not to accept it. So those may end soon, but of course, as we know, when it came to the actors, the studios were not very kind. They were saying things like, let them freeze in the dark, pretty much, and let them starve, and then they'll come back crying. Well, seems they didn't wait until they were starving, so I'm guessing maybe the deal stricken with the writers was able to set up a template for the actors. But we will get into this and a bit with his career. I wanted to ask you, sir, when the strike started, how was it going to affect you? Because I know things are different for Canadian actors than American actors.
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not a member of SAG, which is the American Actors Union, and I'm not a member of the Writers Guild of America. I am a member of ACTRA, which is the Canadian Actors Union, and the Writers Guild of Canada, which is the Canadian Screenwriters Union.
Mm-hmm.
So we were both of those unions were very, interested in what was happening, because the same issues that put those unions on strike in the U.S. exist here as well.
Right.
And both of those unions are going into negotiations with their Canadian equivalents of the U.S. studios soon, and going on into the next year. So Canadians were watching those strikes very closely to see how they played out. And I give all credit to the American members of SAG and the Writers Guild. I mean, they held their ground on these issues. They walked the picket line. They made their intentions known that they weren't going to cave on this. And from what I understand of the agreements that they were able to get from the studios, they didn't cave. They did achieve what they were going to achieve for the most part.
Right.
And I'm hoping, as a Canadian, that we'll be able to use their wins as a way of preventing a strike from happening in Canada. I was lucky because during the strike period, a lot of production in Canada is U.S. production.
Right.
That all shut down.
Right.
All the U.S. shows that shoot in Canada had no scripts to shoot because the writers were on strike, and had no stars to film because the leads in their shows were on strike. And the Canadian people, we don't tend to be the stars in these American shows, but we are the doctors and the lawyers and the sidekicks on them. And so those people were out of work, as well as, and this is probably not as understood as much as the writers and the actors, the crews.
Carpenters, electricians, key grips, all of
them. But they were out of work for the entire period of that strike. And it's ongoing, because to ramp up U.S. production in Canada is going to take a while. I'm lucky because I was not on strike, and the show that I was shooting, Transplant, is a Canadian show, written by Writers Guild of Canada members. It's acted by ACTRA members. Its crew is Canadian, and so we were still in production during that period of the strike. So I was luckier than a lot of my colleagues who are more dependent on U.S. production to be working. So I was still able to work, but I was very interested in what that strike was doing, because the issues are the same. I mean, I have been on Well, you mentioned a hit show that I was on called Kim's Convenience.
Mhm.
And Kim's Convenience is a CBC show, and it's first shown on CBC, but it subsequently went to Netflix worldwide, and that's what made it a big hit internationally, obviously. And as a member of the cast of Kim's Convenience, I have never seen a dime from Netflix uh, for
Oh,
for it being a hit, and that's
Really?
because streamers
yep.
don't pay, and that was one of the big issues of the strike. So that the issues affect Canadians as much as they affect Americans, and
Yeah.
they affect actors in other countries as well, because these streamers are international, multinational conglomerates. And it's just like with music. If you listen to music online, they're paying 0.000000001 cent a stream.
Right.
Even big acts aren't making any money from
Mm.
streaming any more than actors are making money from Netflix or these other streamers.
Right.
And it's a big issue. I haven't studied the agreement that this screen actors and the writers in the U.S. have achieved to know how well this issue has been addressed, but it has been to enough for them to end their strike. So I'm cautiously optimistic that uh, the wins will apply universally.
Mhm.
That Netflix will have to pay everybody, not just the Americans, going forward. But we'll see.
Yes, indeed.
So I didn't know that they weren't paying for that because I thought once. So I know that.
Well, here's how
Okay, let me back it up a bit.
when a show goes on Netflix that isn't produced by Netflix, like The
Right.
Crown is produced by Netflix, so Netflix pays $50 million for The Crown, and
Right.
I'm sure those actors do well.
Yeah.
But when a show is already made, like Kim's Convenience, and then acquired by Netflix, essentially they're being a platform. They're saying we'll take the show and we will pay a fee based on how many people watch the show, 0.0001 cent a stream or whatever it is, and that goes to the producers. Well,
Yeah.
so there's no profit in that for me to share in
Right.
as a profit share, because as a once I get paid by the CBC, uh, not the CBC, by the producers for the CBC run, then they have to eat into a kind of prepayment for anything else, and
Right.
what they're making off Netflix is so little, they haven't eaten into any of my prepayment yet. So I have seen nothing for Netflix, and that's very common. That's
Mhm.
how most of the shows that are on Netflix or Amazon or whatever, they will pay for the initial, when the show gets produced,
Right.
the actors get
Mhm.
paid, obviously the writers get paid, but it is the streaming revenue that we're not really
Seeing anything.
Yeah.
seeing anything for, because these
Okay.
streamers, which are, they've got enough money, they're making enough money to
Oh,
pay
yeah.
their CEO $35 million a year,
Yeah.
but they haven't paid
Yeah.
me a dime. So, you do the math.
It's really
See,
interesting because
that's a surprise. I had no idea. I had no idea. I thought it was, once you get picked up by a streaming service for, like Netflix or Prime or whatever have you, I thought, okay, now the money rolls in. No idea. Now I know that productions that they do on their own, the actors, producers, writers, directors, they get paid because it's an in-house production. But I thought once they picked up something else, that was like a nice payday.
It's
But
different because, like Transplant, for example, is a show that's broadcast on CTV in Canada. Um, it is sold to broadcast markets around the world. I think over 200 markets around the world. Those markets actually pay money
right.
because they're airing it on their channels. They're selling ads to pay
Mhm.
for it, et cetera, et cetera. A streamer is not a broadcaster. So a
right.
streamer like a Netflix, like an Amazon, like Paramount Plus or whatever, they acquire shows and they're essentially platforms. They're no different than Spotify or Tidal
Mhm.
or Apple Music, who basically are a platform for Sony Music recording art,
Mhm.
Right.
right? So Sony Music puts all their music on the Spotify platform, and then Spotify measures how many people stream Led Zeppelin, and send Sony Music, or I don't know if Led Zeppelin is, but you know
Right.
what I mean.
Yeah.
Sends so the record company an amount of money equivalent to what they're paying for a stream, and the amount of money is so little that there's very little scene. That's why you see all of these music acts touring so much more now, because that's how they make a living.
Right.
That's it.
Living.
Yeah.
They're not selling CDs like the, you know, when you bought a CD back in the day, about 50% of that went to Led Zeppelin. Now, you know,
Well,
whatever. But I mean, you know, you paid
they got money.
$15 for a CD. You know, $1 went to Led Zeppelin, maybe.
Right.
That's a
Yes.
lot more than you're streaming Stairway to Heaven, and 0.00001 cent goes to Led Zeppelin. Now, there's enough people streaming Stairway to Heaven that, you know, Led Zeppelin's probably still doing okay, but they're not doing what they did when you were buying their CDs and records. So
Right.
that's why a lot of these acts are going on tour, because that's the only way they can make a living compared to what they made from when they had a CD, a record deal, quote unquote.
Right.
Now they have a streaming deal, and you know they're not making any money. It's like
Clearly.
it's no different than putting their music up on Bandcamp or any of these other things, where they might as well put their music on Bandcamp because they make more per stream off Bandcamp than they do off Spotify. And if I had you know, you know, as an actor on a TV show, I don't even have that flexibility. You know,
No.
a music artist can decide, okay, I'm not going to have my music on Neil Young, for example. I'm not going to do this, and he has his own platform, Neil Young Music, that you can get his music on, but he's not on Spotify for a lot of reasons. As an actor, I don't have that means. I can't put Kim's Convenience up on my, you know, my website
Platform.
Right.
and collect the money. So we're really kind of screwed that way. We're dependent on the streaming revenue that doesn't exist.
Well, and everybody's making money, but the people who actually made the production,
That's right.
the actors,
Streamers,
you know.
I mean, the streamers would say they're not making money either. You know, that's why they're raising the monthly fee all the time. I just got my notice that Disney Plus is going, or Apple TV is raising the fee, and you know, like I haven't figured out the math on the business model for these streamers, because it's like they're making a lot of money but they don't have to spend money for the programming, and so where's all the money going? And yet they have to raise the monthly fee every 6 months. So, you know, it's an interesting. There'd be an interesting forensic accounting exercise.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Now I'm noticing, can't help but notice what you're talking about, that like the parallels with, for example, journalism, the articles that are being put on these platforms, like, you know, Meta and whatnot. But it's sort of like a streaming platform for journalism, and they're not paying the content creators. Here, they're not paying the content creators, the actors, the talent. And if there's no actors, there's no shows. And that's why there was the big concern about AI. Because, hey, we'll just like, get you to do this show once, and then we'll just lift your image and we'll lift your voice, and then we'll use it however we want in perpetuity forever.
Well, that's a whole other, you know, that's a whole other scary side of the whole strike too, which was what the studios wanted to do with AI, which was basically, you know, take your likeness and use it as they want. And if you know anything about AI, they can do a sequel to Casablanca starring Humphrey Bogart.
Yeah.
It's entirely possible to do it now. So, you know, that's really scary, and how that's monetized or not monetized. I mean, I think it's interesting you bring up journalism. You see what's happened online with journalism. You know, the death of the daily newspaper, the consolidation of newspapers into, you know, 2 or 3 massive companies in Canada anyway that own them, that all speak with the same voice. And you don't have the kind of local news like you had before. It happens in broadcasting. There's very little local news broadcasting anymore. There's local newspapers. And being a journalist now, I don't know how you make a living being a journalist. If you're lucky enough to get a job at an existing paper or an existing TV network, good luck. I mean, we'll see how long that lasts, because all they're doing is contracting. Because nobody's paying for news anymore anyway, you know, and that's part of the problem. You know, if you're paying $10 a month for Netflix, how much of that is available to go to me for Kim's Convenience? Not a lot, right?
Yeah.
And you spread that over how many shows are shown on Netflix. I mean, you can see how the math does work. I mean, I blame Napster back in the day for creating a culture that says, "Oh, music's free."
Yeah.
Right? We don't have to pay for stuff anymore. And I think that's true for a lot of things now, that the public really doesn't uh, want to pay for stuff. And so, the idea of, and in the old days, broadcasting, you were paying for it through ads, through commercials.
Right.
Mhm.
Public
Yes.
doesn't want commercials anymore. They don't want to have to pay for a ticket. They don't want to pay for a CD. And you've got a whole generation now that has been raised with free content.
Right.
So you've got, a world of journalists, actors, screenwriters, and musicians who can't make a living anymore.
Yeah. It's
Unless you're Taylor Swift or U2 or
Right. And Taylor Swift is making her money from her shows.
her tours. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting that what you're talking about the streaming services, because um, I act myself, but I haven't done that much TV or anything. I'm more stage. But I did do one commercial, like when I was a teenager, and the whole concept of residuals for your shows, the whole concept of residuals for your commercial, that all leaves with the streaming platform. You don't have that
Mhm.
because I
Well, you
think
don't
it's like
have
if you are on, pardon?
You don't have commercials on streamers, though. Now
Oh,
they're trying to have two-tiered memberships, so you can have,
Mhm.
if you pay less, you then
Mhm.
get the show. You watch Kim's Convenience with commercials.
Yeah. But it's like if your show was on one platform, like see, it was on CBC and then got picked up by one of like the pay television channels that we had before, there would be something. And if it was on for if it got syndicated, there would be something. And if it went on, if it
Well,
was on for
and
13 weeks and then another 13 weeks, you got something. But all that disappears.
another big issue in Canada because commercials used to be unionized.
Right.
Mhm.
ACTRA, the Canadian Actors Union, used to be the agents. I mean, the union for TV commercials. I was in a few myself, and as you point out, you were paid a fee to be in the commercial, and then if the commercial ran, and they would do commercials that never ran, so you only got your fee. But if the commercial ended up running, they had to pre-buy 13 weeks
Right.
of running on whatever market they were at, and if your market was national, you got a big check because they were buying
Mhm.
for all those markets. You got a 13-week residual. Uh, the agencies, like the public, don't want to pay that anymore.
Mhm.
So they essentially locked out ACTRA from being able to do commercials, and that's been the case for the last 15 years.
Wow.
ACTRA members can no longer do commercials. So all the commercials, or most of the commercials that you see now, are non-union commercials, and those people are doing them for a flat fee. They get $500 or whatever it is, and the client, the agency, Canadian Tire, they don't have to pay anything more than that, and they're happy. Because now, here's an example. The Canadian Tire commercials used to be great. Paul Constable was in them, and he
Right.
was a Canadian Tire guy, and you love those commercials. Well, you haven't seen Paul for 15 months, have you?
Yeah.
He hasn't been on because he's a union guy, and they're not hiring him to do their commercials anymore. All of those commercials are non-union, which is why I try not to go into Canadian Tire because they're not using union members anymore for their commercials.
Yeah,
Uh,
because I remember when you used to dream of getting a campaign like being Flow on Progressive or the A&W guy or whatnot, because
Really.
people could make their whole lives off that.
My friend Linda Cash used to be the cream cheese girl lady, the cream cheese angel, right?
Yep.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And, I mean, people, and for actors, it's a great thing because it's a tough business, and to be able to have a commercial campaign under your belt meant that you probably had your nut covered for a year or two with those commercials. And
Yeah.
it's
Well, and they pay the bills when the work dries up, right? Because there's times when the work just dries up. I have a few actor friends and a few friends who produce films, and they said, if they don't get a project, there's no money rolling in.
Look, here's the reality of the business. All I ever wanted to do in my career was be on set, whether it was something I had written, was something I acted in, something I directed. After 10 years, my first 10 years in the business, I added up the number of days that I got to be on set. Do you know what it was after 10 years in the business? How many days? 75.
30, 75.
75 days in
Yeah.
10 years.
Yeah.
So 7.5 days a year, I got to do what I wanted to do. Now, here's the thing. Back in the day, 75 days was enough to live on,
Mhm. Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah.
right? I don't know if 75 days now would be enough to live on for 10 years because, you know, even the unions have reduced the amount of money you have to get paid. Like I got paid more 20 years ago for a day on a Canadian sitcom than I did for a day on Kim's Convenience, because the unions have given the Canadian industry a huge discounts on what they have to pay now.
Right.
I mean, it's sort of crazy, you know. So to have commercials be gone as a way of mitigating our variable incomes and having you know, discounts and streaming income and all that stuff, it is. I mean, I don't know how the kids do it these days. You know, I'm lucky because I have worked so long that I get royalties and residuals from shows that I did 10, 20, 30 years ago. That helps. But if you're starting out now and you're non-union, I don't think you make a living. I don't know how you could.
Yeah, no kidding. Look, it's a lot tougher struggle today to do anything, right? Because the cost of living has gone up, the cost of rents have gone up, mortgages are outrageous, the price of houses are.
But let me caveat what I just said. The opportunities are 100 million times more than when I started.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
So,
Yes.
so the money's less, but the opportunity's greater. I don't know how
It's
maybe it
weird.
works out, but
Okay.
you know, when I started, there was the CBC and you know, Night Heat. Those were the two options of
I remember Nike.
actor, right?
Yep.
So like, and as a brown actor, I mean, there was no diversity, was not a thing.
Yeah.
Nobody was trying to hire us at all. There was no us. There was just me. I had no role models. There was you know, my first, that you mentioned, that CBC movie I wrote and starred in. Well, the reason I starred in it was that there were no brown actors back then to cast in the movie.
So it was just you.
They were going to cancel the movie and end my career. And
Yep.
Oh my
I
God.
begged them to let me audition. I auditioned 3 times and I got the part. And that's really how I started acting, because I was just a writer at that point in my career. I had no intention of being an actor. And that's how I started having an acting career. Was I acted in the movie I wrote at the risk of it not happening at all.
It's really interesting
Wow.
you mentioned that, because when I did that commercial when I was 16, so I mean that's 34 years ago, you know, and it was before they had the apprentice programs with ACTRA. So they said, well, you know, if you want to get your ACTRA card, you got to have X number of more credits over the X number of years. Not one opportunity came along. There was nothing else. There was that only one, and the only reason I got that one is that it was a commercial for something having to do with Degrassi. So they were looking for some diversity. Other than that, nothing came along at all. There was no real opportunity to get that ACTRA card. It never happened.
Wow.
Yeah, but you know, now the opportunity, like I sit on the board of AFBS, which is the insurance and pension program for the Writers Guild and for ACTRA both. And it is actually the most successful arts guild insurance and pension plan in the country, and if not in the world. Just so you know,
Really?
It's been operating for 35 years.
Canadian success story. But anyway, so I get all the stats, and our highest earners are in their 20s and 30s. You know, so the opportunities do exist.
Right.
And for brown kids in their 20s and 30s, you know, their opportunities now are like, I can't even begin to dream of what they get to do that I never could dream of, you know. So there is that. That said, it's a much tougher business. I mean, I look at the business now and I go, I don't think I could break in now. The way I broke in back, you know, writing my own movie and then acting in it, like, you could never do that now. I mean, it's such a huge corporate industry now. It was, you know, I mean, I don't know how I pulled it off, to be honest, but I and I couldn't advise anybody now what, you couldn't do what I did.
No,
It's,
no.
it's
Not with like a big production company or a broadcaster.
I
I mean,
mean, it's
you,
the
I mean,
whole,
you, if you can get the money together, you can do something, put it on YouTube, and hopefully that
well, and
gets
people
enough
do
people.
that, but I mean that's sort of homemade TV that
Yeah,
God, I'm glad that's possible. Your iPhone is a better camera than what I went and studied in film school, and
it's true.
you can make your own movie that way, and people do. And I know a lot of young actors and writers who do make their own content and they put it up on YouTube or whatever. Um, the the problem with that is that it may or may not find an audience. You may or may not be able to monetize it.
Mhm.
And the bigger issue, I think, is that you may or may not learn how to get better. When I was starting out,
Right.
I was working in the industry. I got a job writing a TV series, and I was young and green, and I had to learn how to do it or get fired.
Right.
And I learned on the job, and I learned
Mhm.
from were seasoned professionals how to do the job, and I expanded my skill set working in the industry until I reached the point where I knew more than I know more than I thought I could know, learning on my own.
Right.
And the people who are required now to make their own content, I don't know if they can learn from the best because they're teaching themselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a drawback that I see. My drawback was that I couldn't make my own content. I had to become part of the industry, and I was lucky enough to become part of the industry and work my way up and all that stuff. Nowadays, it's much harder to become part of the industry, but you have the option to create your own content. However, are you going to be better at that? I mean, I work on a lot of films with young filmmakers and young actors, and they've learned a lot of bad habits because they haven't learned at the seasoned professionals. And so like there's a trade-off here, and I'm not sure if things are better or worse, but they are different.
Well, it's a double-edged sword, like you say, because I mean, I watch a lot of content. I watch a lot of YouTube stuff. The streaming services, and what I've noticed is some creators are very good and shows that they've had some professional training. Other creators are, well, I don't want to be unkind, but their lack of experience with writing and the world really does shine through in some of the productions I've seen on YouTube. I'm not trying to diminish anybody, but you definitely see, like you just said, that they've not learned from seasoned professionals, so they continue to make the same mistakes. Double-edged sword. They have the ability to go and create the content, put it out for the world to see. Can they monetize it? Not as easy to monetize on YouTube as it was 10 years ago, because they changed the rules on that. You need all these different requirements to get paid anything.
If you're doing this as an artistic choice with your life, which we all are,
Right.
you don't spring forth fully formed.
No.
If I look at that CBC movie, I haven't seen it in a couple of decades probably, but if I watched it, I would probably be really embarrassed at how clumsy the writing is and how bad my acting is and all that stuff. I got away with it because back then I wasn't being compared to, there was no other brown guy doing it anyway. So, they said, okay, well, I guess this is what that guy does. But I learned, and I was trained doing it by really people who knew better than I did. So much so that I was able to get a job writing for the Muppets on Fraggle Rock. Jim Henson hired me not because I was brown, and not because I was, an experienced Muppet writer or anything. I mean, I think he just saw some potential and gave me a shot, and I had to deliver. Right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, I wrote scripts that almost didn't get made because they weren't that good. And my boss, Jerry Jewell, I remember I was writing my third script, and this is before computers.
Right.
I was writing on a typewriter, and I was literally cutting and pasting. And this script was in rough. It was not going to happen, and I was going to get fired. So I spent the weekend cutting and pasting, and I brought this thing in to my boss, Jerry Jewell, who was the head writer, and really the third Muppet. I mean, he wrote everything Miss Piggy and Kermit ever said.
Mhm.
And it was this thick, because it was all glued pieces of paper, 30 pages, but it was all, and I handed it to him, and he looked at it, and he went, handwriting in the margins and typewriting and, all this crazy. And he took it, and I went, okay. And he took it into his office, and I paced for 45 minutes outside his office while he read it. And I'll never forget this. I've told this story before. He came out of his office, and he looked at me, and he put out his hand, and he said, "Nice save." And I saved my job, and
Okay.
Wow.
that's what it took, right? But I learned, and I learned on the job from somebody like Jerry Jewell, who like I said, had written everything Miss Piggy and Kermit ever said. I mean, he had forgotten more when I was working for him than I'll ever learn
Mhm.
Right.
about writing for the screen. I mean, pretty much everything I know about writing for the screen comes from Jim Henson and Jerry Jewell. I mean,
That's wild.
you learn from the best, you remember it, and it sort of spoiled me for working for anybody else since. But people now, you're making your own stuff with your phone and putting it on YouTube. They don't have that chance.
Mhm.
Right.
So they're only, that's a kind of circular education. They're only learning, and everybody's cheerleading a bit. They're telling them how great it is, and there's nobody's going to get fired if it's no good. And
Right.
so I mean, I'm happy for them that that opportunity for creating your own content exists,
Mhm.
and you don't have to be dependent on an industry to get in and make stuff. And I think that's fantastic. But there is a caveat to that, which is how much will you progress? How much will you learn? How will you get better? Will you be able to get to industry level standard doing that? Some might, if you're naturally
Mhm.
gifted. Others, I'm not naturally gifted. I just had learned, and that path, I don't know if is open to you if if you make your own content, if you're not naturally gifted.
Right.
And I don't pretend to be tremendously talented or naturally gifted. I just worked harder than anybody else, and that's how I succeeded.
Mhm.
You know what?
Lucky
That's true for a lot of people in any walk of life, whether it's sports or music or art or whatever. You just keep working, put your 10,000 hours in, and plus, in many cases, your craft will start to improve. And you can see that some people work extra hard to get good at it, and then there's the few people that you can see in their beginning they're rough, but as you can see the progression very quickly, and those are the people who just are born with the gift, the talent, right? And there's not a lot of those people. I think more people spend more time working hard at it to try and develop themselves than just, you know, trip and tumble a couple of times and then get up, dust themselves off and say, Eureka, I've got it, and have it all
I mean,
put
the
together.
naturally gifted don't need to listen to me.
Mm.
They're going to be fine. But the 99% who aren't naturally gifted, but who are talented, and talent is
Mhm.
a prerequisite,
Right.
uh, but need training and need to learn from their mistakes and need to be required to deliver. That pressure makes you learn really fast, right?
Oh, it does.
Uh,
Absolutely.
and so that's what I attribute any success I have was due to that, as much as any talent that I might have. I mean, there was a lot of luck in being able to be in the right place at the right time back then, especially.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I sort of I get choked up thinking, oh God, I really was lucky, because if I hadn't walked in that door and met that person at that, oh God, I'm a
Right.
brown kid from Saskatoon. How was I ever able to pull this off? And so luck is really critical, but the ability to have that career path of learning from people who know more than you do
Mhm.
is invaluable, unless you're naturally gifted, and I couldn't count on being naturally gifted.
Mhm. Now, when you were working on Fraggle Rock, you wrote 10 of the episodes, one that was directed by Jim Henson himself.
Mhm.
Um, Fraggle Rock is now past its 40th anniversary, and there's been a reboot. Um, What is that like for you looking back? Because that show means so much to so many people. And did you ever get a call for the reboot to come and write?
No, and I'm one of the few people still alive.
That's true.
You think they would have? Well, I think that I don't hold that against anybody. I'm the old fart from the previous show. But
Mhm.
you asked me what I think about the fact that it's 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Uh, it feels like a dream.
Mhm.
It feels like this incredible dream I had that I got to work on the most amazing, fun experience anybody could ever have. As much as a friend of mine, Larry Merkin, who produced Fraggle Rock, always says, as much fun as you think it was more fun.
Oh,
Mhm.
Like all I remember from 4 seasons of working on that show is laughing.
Mhm.
I would go into Jerry Jewell's office pitching my stupid idea for an episode, and Jocelyn Stevenson was there, and Larry was there, and the four of us would basically laugh for an hour, and I would come out with an entirely different idea than what I walked in with.
right.
That's what I ended up writing.
Right.
I don't know how that happened. I have no idea how that happened. I don't know if it was I just wrote down all of Jerry's ideas, or I had one myself. I don't know. It was pure magic, and then making the show, like working with these puppeteers who had worked on Sesame Street and the Muppet series. Jerry Nelson and Dave Goltz and
Right.
Steve Whitmire. I mean, these guys. Richard Hunt. My God. I mean, these people were giants, and I was a kid at the time. I was just grateful to be in the same area code as all of these people that I was working with, and yet I was writing for them. It was an incredible experience. That show, what we did was you would write your script, and then we had 2 table reads, one the week before we shot your script, and then one the week of, on the Monday mornings. And I don't know if you know about television production, but table reads are, the cast shows up, the producers show up, the network shows up, and that's it.
Right.
At the table reads for Fraggle Rock, the entire crew showed up. 80 people were there watching this table read. And I remember asking Jim, because after season 1, Jim wanted us to write on the front page of every script the answers to 4 questions. And this is a little screenwriting 101 lesson. And the answer to the questions were, whose story is it? What do they want? What's the obstacle? What's at stake? And what do we learn?
Okay.
And I said to Jim, why do you want us to do that? I mean, we do that for ourselves, but why do you want us to put it on the front page of every script? And he said, so that anyone working on the show knows what that week's episode is about. They don't have to read the script. And of course, the irony was they all came to the table reading, so they do it better than anybody did. So then we'd have these table reads on the Monday. That was the final table read, because you got to rewrite based on the previous table read the week before. Tuesday, the cast would go into the recording studio and record the songs for that show, which had been written in advance by Phil Balsam and Dennis Lee. It was amazing. I would write in the script, Gobo was the lead character.
Yep.
Gobo sings a song about friendship or something like that. And then a week and a half later, Phil would send me a recording of him singing this song that Dennis had written lyrics to. That was like this reggae, masterpiece.
Yeah.
Being brave, and it was incredible. So then you'd have to cut out pieces of the script to fit the song in.
Right.
The song was like 2.5 minutes long, right? This is part of the process. So anyway, on the Tuesday, they'd go in and record the songs. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we'd shoot the show. Now, as the show was being shot, there's a script supervisor timing how long each scene takes compared to how long the show could be.
Right.
So she'd come up to me after, at lunchtime on Wednesday and say, okay, you're running a minute long. So that meant I have to cut a minute out of what's left to shoot. So I'm rewriting on the floor as we're shooting this stuff. And then by Friday, oh, you're running a minute long. Oh, no, I don't. I only have 3 scenes left to cut out of. It was incredible. And then Saturday and Sunday they would edit the show, and Monday morning they would send an edited version of the show, not with music or anything, but the edited version to LA to HBO. And I don't know if anybody remembers this, but HBO was the partner on that series with the CBC.
Right.
Fraggle Rock was the very first TV show that HBO ever commissioned. Long before The Sopranos or Game of Thrones, any of that stuff, Fraggle Rock was the very first TV series on HBO. And back then, we would have to send the scripts to HBO in LA, right? Well, we had the state-of-the-art 24 baud acoustic coupled modem that we would hook up to a computer that would send the script overnight.
Overnight.
It took all night to send the script to LA, and this was, ahead of its time because we were saving FedEx, our costs because we could email this script. It took all night to send to LA.
Reminds me of that scene from Almost Famous where he has to send pages to Rolling Stones headquarters. He says, go into the New York Times. They have a mojo machine. They send pages over the phone, and it only takes 7 minutes a page.
Yeah. No, it's the same thing. I mean, we didn't. This is before faxes.
Fax. Oh yeah.
This is acoustically coupled. This is like, it looked like a telephone handset that stuck down into a suction cup that would. You hear this? It's like transmitting sound overnight, and it's the sounds that then get translated back into text at the other. I mean, it's mind-boggling when you think about it. And the other thing is that show, Jim was ahead of its time. He shot the show in 420p, which is DVD quality, not HD. It's DVD quality. This is before DVDs.
Right.
Yeah.
He still insisted the show be shot in this quality that nobody in the world could watch it on, except on this monitor that we had in the studio. And we would push the button to see, ooh, that looks really sharp. Oh, I've never seen it, because we're used to the old cathode ray tube, and this was 480p, which is why the show was possible to master it for HD for the Apple TV remount. Like the Apple TV airs the show, and it's on HD because they had enough of the original version on 420p that they could do that. I mean, this is also. I mean, we were using radio-controlled puppets. The little green, the doozers.
Yes.
So those are all radio controlled. They were about this high in real life, and a puppeteer would put their hand in a kind of electromechanical glove on the side of the soundstage, and they could manipulate the mouth of that radio-controlled doozer and do the voice because they were mic'd. And then the doozer's little mouth would move, and and like this is and it was all against green screen, or back then it was blue screen.
Right,
blue screen.
We could superimpose a backdrop that was, say, the Gorg's garden, and then the Fraggles were moving around in the garden, but they weren't. It was all blue screen. So I mean, it was really cutting edge for its time. We were doing stuff that the Mandalorian does now, but nobody gave us credit for it. It was just puppets, but it was all there. I mean, it was all being done back then.
See, I would have never guessed it was blue screen. I really thought watching it that the set was built.
No, there was physical sets too, but you remember that the Gorgs were much bigger than the Fraggles. So when Junior Gorg grabbed a Fraggle in his hand, the little mouth had to move, right? So that was a radio-controlled Fraggle, as opposed to the full-size Fraggle that fit on a puppeteer's arm.
Okay.
So there were two sizes of Fraggles, and there were, and the doozers themselves were radio-controlled in order to be able to have the mouths move. But there's also a lot of monofilament. It was like little, very faint fishing wire that was a lot of the tricks. And I mean, it was an amazing experience. I can't believe I was part of it, and it feels like a dream when I think back on it. I go, did I really work on that?
Yeah.
So what happened? What feeling do you get like when someone like me comes back? Because that's how we sort of connected on the web. Is that it happened to be the year of the 40th anniversary, and I was like, "Oh my God, you worked on Fraggle Rock!" I was like, I love that show." What happens when someone comes to you and says, like, "I watched every episode. I love that show. It was so
I was
meaningful to
so
me."
young. I was so young when the show was being done. I didn't know anybody who watched it. I had no idea. I mean, I knew people watched it, but I didn't know anybody.
Okay,
So,
Yeah, you were like 14 at the time, right?
well, something like that. Thank you. But I was so young, I didn't know anybody who watched it. I didn't have friends who had kids or anything like
right.
that.
Hmm.
Um, and so making the show was my that's what I got out of it.
Hmm.
The sense of there being an audience for it was really abstract for me back then. So when somebody says to me, "I watched every episode," I mean, I'm amazed, because I didn't know anybody who watched any of it. As far as I was concerned, we were just writing and making this show for ourselves. I
Hmm.
was, as long as I was happy, and Jerry Jewell and Jim Henson, didn't matter if there was an audience, because I didn't know who the audience even existed, other than as an intellectual. Yeah, the show's seen in
Hmm.
X number of countries and all that. So to actually meet people who the show meant something to is sort of overwhelming for me, because it was that thing is so. And television is tough because we never really meet an audience.
Right.
Like, if you do
Right.
a movie, you can go to the premiere and there's an audience there. If you do a play, there's an audience there.
Right.
TV, the audience is your crew.
Hmm.
And that's been true from the beginning of my career. You don't really get a sense. The one time I've sensed there was an audience is when a TV series gets to premiere somewhere, like Transplant. The first episode got to premiere at the TIFF Bell Lightbox
Right.
Right.
audience, and so you got, but that doesn't happen very often. You do TV shows, and most of my career is in television. So like a show like Fraggle Rock or whatever, you never get a sense of there being an audience. And
Mhm.
I've done enough TV. Not much of it did get an audience, but I know Fraggle Rock did. But I never met him until 25, 30 years later. They come up to me and they're these grown-ups telling me, "I watched every episode of Fraggle Rock." I'm going, "How old are you? How old am I? What's going on here?"
Well,
There's that.
I've been a fan of Transplant since day
Yeah.
one, and I watched the very first episode, and I went, it just got me thinking about how far we've come as a country in a short
Yeah.
time period for the diversity that we now show on television. Because at one point in time, everybody looked like me, right? Except for Bruno Gerussi. But there was that, but
Jesse.
also
Bald cousin.
yeah. Well, Jim. But if you look at the quality of the productions today and the diversity, you look at 40 years ago, it didn't exist. Didn't exist at
No,
all.
it didn't exist, and Transplant is a very good example of something that's actually, even Transplant is unique, because um, the diversity is taken for granted in the casting. I mean, in the creation of the characters, even.
Mm.
Like, we were doing a scene, season 3. There was a scene. I don't know if you saw the episode where there was a guy who was crushed between two cars outside the hospital, and so we were trying to save his life because he was bleeding out internally. And there's a scene where it's me, Rekha Sharma, who plays the head of the hospital, Hamza Haq, who's the series lead, who plays Bash, and Gord Rand, who's the other doctor. And we were rehearsing the scene, and in the middle, Gord stops and he says, "Oh yeah, this looks like a Toronto hospital, because there's 3 brown people and a white guy."
Yep.
Lab coat, right?
Yeah.
And nobody, that's not an issue. That's just a given. So
It's just a given.
that's the
Yeah.
first thing. The second thing, it's the first Canadian show I've ever been on that I never felt like they were trying to cut corners. Like,
Okay.
I operated on anatomically correct, exact prosthetic duplicate dummies of the actors playing the patients. And the guys who make those dummies, they go to New Zealand when we're not shooting Transplant to do Lord of the Rings, and they make aliens.
Mhm.
Like, they're incredible. And our set I mean, if you can find the videos of that set, it was a 28,000 square foot set. That was, I mean, I've been on a lot of sets, even The Expanse. If you turn the corner on The Expanse, you see it's a fake wall, and on the hospital set of Transplant, you turn the corner, it's a real floor, real walls, real ceilings. Everything worked except plumbing, even though because it's in a soundstage, and it was just this breathtaking experience to act on it, because you weren't aware of it being a TV show. There was no lights anywhere, because every light on that set was practical and controllable by a massive computer in the fake elevator shaft. That the DOP, I mean, you could turn everything off, on, blue, green, white, whatever. So there were never any lights. You go into a typical TV studio and there's like lights and
Right.
flags and all this stuff in your way, and you have to act through that. Here, you just got to be in a hospital. I mean, the camera was there, but that was it. And it just made the process of making the show that much more genuine. And I've never had that experience on a Canadian show before. So I think all of that stuff is on the screen.
Yes.
Like and that to me is, I'm very proud to have been part of Transplant, because I think it set a high watermark for Canadian shows in terms of its production values, in terms of its writing, in terms of its, as you point out, the diversity, which you sort of take for granted, and it's uniquely Canadian in that it's no way that's an American hospital, because nobody talked about how to pay for the operation.
Right. Yeah, it's
And
unabashedly
there wasn't 57 gunshot victims either.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Sugith, unfortunately, our time has come to an end. It went by so quickly.
I've enjoyed our conversation. You brought let me going back into the vault of memories here. So it was
Nice.
talk about it.
Thank you so very much for joining us. We really,
really
really
do
appreciate it. And please
Love to have
come
you back
anytime.
Anytime.
Yeah. All right.
Fantastic.
We only got through the first 10. We got through the first 10 years of
First 10 years.
There you
Exactly.
We'll do a series of 4 shows, right? One for each decade.
You haven't even heard about my experience working for Sonny Grosso on Night Heat. That's a whole other chapter about Canadian television.
I do want to hear about that.
Absolutely.
That defined independent production in Canada. Working on
I do remember.
Sonny Grosso. There's a whole generation of actors who have careers now because of Sonny Grosso. Who, if you watch the movie French Connection, Roy Scheider played him in the movie French Connection, and after he retired from the NYPD, he came to Toronto and made TV shows.
Excellent.
Anyway, that's a whole other episode.
We'll have to chat about that again sometime. Thank you again for your time, sir. We really do appreciate it. You've been very generous with us, and we're looking forward to having you back again in the very near future.
Be happy to come back.
Right.
All right. You take care.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, kits. We're going to do this very quickly because we have another show coming on really quickly.
2 minutes. We got to go.
You know what to do. Like, share, subscribe on our YouTube channel. If you'd like to contribute there, right there, if you scan that brings you to our pod page where you can subscribe and not miss an episode as soon as it comes fresh off the bandwidth. And the other QR code right by Mr. Grizzly's head brings you to our coffee page. That's ko-fi.com/eagerbeaver, lowercase letters. And that's where you can make a donation to the Eager Beaver Lodge Emergency Hydration Fund if you'd like us to bring more content like this to you. All right, we've got to go. No time for words of wisdom. We'll see you soon. Bye.
You take care. Bye-bye.
You are listening to a True North Eager Beaver Media Podcast. The True North Eager Beaver podcasts are proudly brought to you by our founding sponsors, the Miss V Mysteries from Corvid Moon Publishing, your source for science fiction, fantasy, and cozy mysteries featuring a broad diversity of characters. CanadianTarot.com, your uniquely Canadian online eclectic tarot community and forum. And The Peppermaster, hot pepper sauces made from fresh farm ingredients to thrill your taste buds and expand your mind.
Have a beaver